The warning came with a receipt and a whisper, "Your son's being bled dry," and by the time the register beeped, my whole life had slid across the conveyor belt with the cake. My name is Margaret Cole. 67. Retired school secretary. Thrifty as a church bake sale. And stubborn enough to argue with a parking meter. I was paying for a vanilla sheet cake when the cashier, Eli Whitaker, the kind of man who looks like he knows every coupon code known to humankind, lightly caught my wrist. His eyes had a strange urgency. Like he'd seen a house smoking 2 miles off and knew the wind was coming our way. "Ma'am," he breathed, leaning closer so the overhead speakers, 2 for 1 avocados, wouldn't drown him out. "Are you Daniel Cole's mother?" I answered yes, because I was raised to be honest and also because my driver's license is, tragically, not a secret. Eli's jaw worked like he was debating whether to ruin my day or save my life. He did a little of both. "I think your son's in trouble," he said, "and I think they're using you to keep it quiet." They, he clarified 3 seconds later, when my eyebrows went north of my hairline, means Vanessa, your daughter-in-law, and her father, Richard Hayes. The barcode sang, the receipt spit out, and my heart began its own drum solo. I drifted out the side exit on autopilot, past the freezer aisle and a cardboard stack of 4th of July soda. Stepped into the heat, and tasted metal on my tongue. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the $20 cake I had justified as a small celebration of family unity, which suddenly felt like frosting on a lie. I did not go back to my son's car. Daniel, gentle, earnest, the kind of man who tips the barista even when she spells his name, denial, was waiting out front and would see everything in my face. Instead, I slipped around the building, past a buzzing transformer box, and tucked behind the dumpsters where the grocery store hides its secrets and old lettuce. I know what you're thinking. A respectable grandmother crouched behind a dumpster is not an image you see on the church newsletter. But a lifetime of small economies had taught me this. Sometimes you get the truth only where polite people refuse to look. The air smelled like wilted spinach and last week's shrimp sale. I hiked my purse higher, squared my shoulders, and watched the parking lot through a chain-link square like it was a proscenium stage. Eli's whisper ricocheted in my head. Could Vanessa and her father really be siphoning Daniel's savings while crying poverty? For 3 years, I'd urged patience. She's shy, I told myself, when Vanessa's smiles landed like receipts stamped no returns. They're struggling, I insisted, when Richard described medical bills that grew with the moon. And every time the plea arrived, rent overdue, medication too expensive, pantry bare, Daniel wired money. Sometimes I helped. Sometimes I counted pills to stretch mine. 2 minutes later, the automatic doors sighed open and out walked Richard Hayes, sturdy, silver-haired, wearing a linen shirt that had never met the inside of a dryer. In each hand he carried matte black shopping bags with gold lettering from a boutique so fancy I once got scolded for touching a candle. He moved like a man who was well acquainted with good news. He did not angle toward the faded sedan I'd seen them drive. He clicked open the trunk of a spotless, light-colored new vehicle that winked in the sun. I had to steady myself on a recycling bin. The tires were so new they still had their little rubber eyelashes. The trunk swallowed the bags like a vault accepting deposits. Richard checked his reflection in the tinted window, took out his phone, and called someone. His shoulders were loose. His laugh, yes, I could hear even that, was easy. My stomach dropped, the way it does when an elevator hesitates between floors. Every story I'd filed under hard times began to rearrange itself into hard lies. I felt ridiculous and furious in equal measure. Ridiculous, because I'd believed them. Furious, because my son, who gives strangers jumper cables and childhood friends second chances, was becoming a line item on somebody's lifestyle budget. 2 women pushed carts nearby, chatting. "Did you see Vanessa's dress at the mall?" one said. "At least 200, the other snorted. And she was at the French beauty counter again. My granddaughter says she's in there so often they should name a lipstick after her." I didn't want to be the kind of person who eavesdrops. Then again, I'd already promoted myself to dumpster detective. I pressed closer to the fence, ignoring a rebellious pickle jar lid under my shoe. The store doors sighed again. Richard strolled out with a smaller bag now, paused to peel bills from a roll for a man washing cars, and palmed the cash off like a king tipping the court jester. My palms went cold. If this was "can't make rent," I was the Queen of England. My phone buzzed. "Daniel, everything okay?" "Mom? Long line?" I typed back, almost done. Then closed my eyes, counted to 5, and opened them to the life I actually had. Not the one I wanted. The truth was here, raw and sunlit. The question was what to do with it. I decided on the only plan fit for a thrifty grandmother with a furious heart: gather proof. Keep quiet, and let the facts speak, because if I was right, the next receipt I collected would blow the lid off everything. The trouble with evidence is that once you start collecting it, the world begins handing you clues faster than you can stuff them in your purse. My brain had gone full detective mode. Though my outfit still screamed, "retired lady buying cake," I stayed behind the dumpsters, scribbling notes on the back of my receipt like it was an FBI file. New car, luxury brand, designer bags with gold lettering. Richard Hayes tips car washers like he's auditioning for Robin Hood, only without the redistribution part. I should have been embarrassed. I was 67, for heaven's sake, hiding behind garbage bins like a raccoon with a pension plan. But indignation has a way of burning off shame. I'd spent years stretching my checkbook like taffy, while this family treated Daniel as their personal ATM. As if on cue, a pair of neighbors wandered by, pushing carts full of soda and potato chips. Their voices carried across the lot like gossip was their cardio. "Vanessa's new shoes, Gucci. I swear," one said, balancing a bag of chips like it was a newborn. "Gucci?" the other barked a laugh. "She told me they were hand-me-downs from a cousin in Phoenix." "Yeah, and my cat just inherited a trust fund." I nearly snorted out loud. Humor slips in where heartbreak tries to settle. Still, each sentence was another brick in the wall of lies. A buzzing mosquito circled my ear, reminding me that dignity wasn't the only thing I was sacrificing. I swatted it away and thought about Daniel. My boy, my only boy. He worked 12-hour days and still called me every Sunday just to ask if I'd eaten. And here he was, pouring overtime wages into the sinkhole called Vanessa's emergencies. I remembered one night clearly, Vanessa sobbing over the phone about her father's urgent dental surgery. The kind where apparently even molars carry designer price tags. Daniel wired money before finishing his sandwich. I chipped in, too, $150 I'd been saving for a new pair of eyeglasses. That was last month, and now here stood Richard, teeth intact, crunching biscotti with the confidence of a man whose molars had never known hardship. The store doors opened again. Richard came out, this time without bags, scanning the lot like a cat guarding cream. He looked around carefully, as if afraid of witnesses. He had no idea a grandmother in orthopedic shoes had just promoted herself to his worst nightmare. I ducked lower behind the bin, my knees popping in protest. "Hush," I whispered at them. "This is bigger than both of us." That's when my phone buzzed again. "Daniel." "Mom? You okay? You've been gone forever." I typed back, "Just chatting with a neighbor." "Be right there." A lie. Yes, but for once, a lie told to protect, not exploit. I steadied myself. If Eli the cashier was right, if my eyes weren't lying, then the Hayes family had been running a scam that would make soap opera villains proud. And if that was true, then my son was a mark in their long con. I promised myself right there, by the dumpsters and the buzzing flies, that I would not breathe a word to Daniel, not yet. First, I'd gather proof so undeniable that even love-blind trust couldn't explain it away. And that proof, I was certain, was waiting just around the corner. I left my hiding spot only when Richard's shiny car purred out of the lot, heading toward the horizon like a silver shark. My knees crackled as I straightened up. Apparently crime fighting isn't great for cartilage. Still, I had what I needed, suspicion seasoned with a healthy dash of indignation. Now all I had to do was turn it into proof. When I slid back into Daniel's car, he looked at me with that gentle worry he'd inherited from his father. "Mom, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Oh, just the fluorescent lighting," I said, forcing a chuckle. "Makes everyone look like a medical emergency." I handed him the cake box. Don't tilt it or we'll be eating abstract art. Daniel smiled faintly, distracted, and started the car. He didn't press further, which was both a relief and an ache. My son trusted me, just as he trusted Vanessa. Trust, I thought bitterly, was becoming the most expensive luxury in this family. As we drove toward the Hayes house, my mind staged its own crime drama. The flashbacks came in quick succession. Vanessa calling last winter, voice trembling, claiming their heater had broken in the middle of a snowstorm. Daniel wired money immediately. Later that week, her Instagram story showed her wrapped in a fur-lined coat at a ski resort. Richard sighing about overdue medical bills, then turning up at a barbecue with a watch that probably had its own mortgage. The mysterious rent shortages that always aligned perfectly with Daniel's paydays. My stomach twisted. It wasn't just money, it was manipulation layered so neatly it looked like obligation. We pulled into the neighborhood. All manicured lawns and mailboxes shaped like tiny barns. The Hayes house stood tall. 2 stories of fresh paint and smug curtains. Not exactly the image of financial ruin. Daniel parked, and I made my voice light. Well, they've certainly kept things tidy. They're doing their best. Mom, he said, loyal to the bone. He turned to me, eyes earnest. Vanessa says her dad's been working weekends to pay for repairs. They just need time. If only time could polish lies the way it polishes leather shoes. My throat tightened, but I forced a nod. Of course, dear. The front door swung open before we even rang the bell. There was Vanessa, radiant in a dress that practically announced its own price tag. Her smile was as bright as her perfume was expensive. Margaret, what a surprise, she sang. Arms wide. I leaned in for the hug, inhaling the fragrance that cost more than my weekly groceries. Vanessa, you look prosperous, I said, smiling sweetly. Her eyes flickered, just for a second, but then the mask was back. Flawless as her foundation. I stepped into their house and immediately realized the biggest evidence wasn't behind dumpsters or whispered by cashiers, it was right here. In plain sight. And it was about to slap me across the face in polished marble and imported wine. The moment I crossed their threshold, I nearly tripped over the truth. The Hayes living room gleamed like a showroom for prosperous middle class with delusions of grandeur. Gone was the sagging sofa I remembered from last year. In its place sat a brand new leather sectional that smelled of money and conditioner. A glass coffee table sparkled under the chandelier light. And on the wall, good heavens, hung a flat-screen TV the size of my former marriage bed. I froze mid-step, clutching my cake box like a weapon. Vanessa beamed. Do you like the updates? Margaret? We've been fortunate lately. Fortunate, I repeated, my tongue rolling the word around as if it were poisoned taffy. Well, yes, that sofa looks fortunate enough to retire in. Daniel didn't notice. He was already admiring a framed photo on the mantel, oblivious to the fact that the frame itself looked like it had been imported from Paris. Meanwhile, Vanessa prattled on about her clearance finds and generous friends. Each explanation slid into place with the precision of a lock clicking shut. Richard appeared, wiping his hands with a kitchen towel. Same shirt I'd seen him wear leaving the store, now conveniently hidden beneath an apron. Margaret, he greeted, warmth painted on thick. So glad you could join us. We're making a feast tonight, Vanessa insisted. Behind him, the counters were crowded with evidence, thick cuts of steak marbled like marble itself. Vegetables so fresh they practically sang hymns. And a bottle of wine whose label I recognized only because I'd once considered buying it before fainting at the price tag. Well, I manage, setting down the cake. This is certainly hearty. Richard chuckled. Got it all on sale, of course. Incredible deals this week. There it was again, sales. Bargains. Miracles. At this rate, I half expected him to claim the steaks had been rescued from a church raffle. I smiled, thin and polite, but inside, my fury simmered. Every polished surface, every expensive trinket was another receipt written in invisible ink, tallying up years of deception. I caught Daniel's eye across the room. He looked so content, so sure he'd brought his mother into the warm embrace of a loving family. My heart pinched. If only he knew the embrace was a chokehold lined with silk. As we sat down for dinner, I realized the table itself might hold the most damning proof yet. Because sometimes betrayal isn't whispered behind dumpsters or scrawled on receipts. Sometimes, it's poured straight into your glass and toasted with a smile. The dining table stretched before us like a stage set for royalty. Crystal glasses sparkled under the chandelier. Polished cutlery reflected my wrinkled face back at me. And plates so fine they could have belonged in a museum waited for their grand performance. Richard uncorked the wine with the flourish of a magician revealing a trick. The cork popped, and I swear my heart sank lower than the bottle. I knew that label. Last time I'd seen it, I'd walked away muttering, $50 for fermented grapes? Not on my pension. And yet here it was, glugging into crystal glasses as if we were toasting Versailles. This one's from a friend, Richard said smoothly, handing me a glass. Special discount. Of course. Friends. Deals. Miracles. If their lives were truly powered by such luck, I should have asked them for next week's lottery numbers. I lifted the glass, swirling the crimson liquid. It clung to the sides with slow, elegant legs, the kind of legs no clearance bin bottle ever had. My lips curved in a smile that was 90% polite and 10% try me. Dinner began, and what a spread it was. Steak so tender it practically apologized for being eaten. Salads bursting with colors I hadn't seen outside of gardening magazines. Side dishes layered with spices that had probably traveled further than I ever had. Every bite screamed luxury, and every explanation Vanessa offered, bulk sale. Gift from a friend, unbelievable bargain, sounded more rehearsed than a Broadway musical. Daniel, bless his trusting soul, chewed happily, praising the flavors like a man tasting generosity instead of greed. His eyes shone when Vanessa laughed, her diamond-shaped earrings catching the light. Earrings that, according to her, were just costume jewelry. I'd bet my last blood pressure pill they cost more than my monthly rent. I sipped the wine, letting it burn down my throat. Not just alcohol, evidence. Evidence in a glass, swirling red, impossible to ignore. Across the table, Vanessa's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, tried to hide her smirk, and typed back with fingers quick as secrets. I pretended to fuss with my napkin but kept watching. Something told me the message lighting up her screen wasn't about book club or bake sales. If I wanted undeniable proof, I needed to know exactly who was on the other end of those texts, and what kind of lies were being brewed in the glow of her screen. Vanessa slid her phone face down on the table with the kind of guilty grace only practiced liars have. The screen pulsed once, twice, then went black, like a secret ducking underwater. Everything all right, dear? I asked, buttering my roll with the calm of a woman who'd burned her tongue too many times to show it. Oh, just friends planning a little get-together, she chirped, voice sugar sweet. You know how girls are. I nodded, biting into my bread. Girls don't usually grin like cats after catching a canary. I thought, whatever she was hiding, it wasn't an innocent Tupperware swap. Richard cleared his throat. We've been saving for a celebration next month, he announced, puffing his chest like he'd invented generosity. Vanessa's organizing something special, family only. Daniel's face lit up. That sounds wonderful. I nearly choked on my roll. A celebration? With crystal glasses, imported steak, and secret text messages? If this was saving, then I was the tooth fairy. I tried to keep my tone light. Must be quite an occasion. Birthdays? Anniversaries? Richard hesitated for a beat, just a beat, before answering. Oh, nothing big, just appreciating family while we can. His eyes darted to Vanessa, and hers flicked right back, like two poker players with the same hand of aces. Meanwhile, Daniel lapped it up like gospel. My son, the kindest, most hard-working man I knew, was surrounded by wolves wearing cashmere. I lifted my wineglass again, letting the ruby red swirl in the light. In its reflection, I could see Daniel's hopeful smile, Vanessa's polished mask, and Richard's smug confidence. And there I was too, a grandmother with aching knees and sharper eyes than anyone realized. If they thought I'd stay silent, they underestimated how dangerous a grandmother with a cake knife and a sense of justice could be. The real feast, I decided, would be catching them in their own lies. After dinner, Richard offered me the grand tour of their home. His tone was casual, but his eyes flickered like he wanted to check whether I'd noticed the cracks in their story, or the shine of their spending. We started in the hallway, where framed artwork hung in neat rows. Not prints, not knockoffs, originals. I recognized one signature from a gallery window downtown. A piece I'd once admired before realizing the price tag had more zeros than my retirement account. Found them at a flea market, Richard said smoothly, catching my glance. Lucky bargain. Of course you did, I thought, because nothing screams flea market like oil on canvas worth 3 months of my pension. We moved into the master bedroom. Vanessa's perfume lingered in the air. Expensive and floral, the kind that doesn't come from a drugstore shelf. That's when I saw them. Glossy shopping bags lined up along the dresser. Not tucked away, not hidden, proud trophies of recent hunts. The logos gleamed, brands I'd only seen whispered about in glossy magazines. Oh, those? Richard chuckled nervously when he noticed my gaze. Vanessa is thrifty. Clearance sales. I raised an eyebrow. Clearance sales that come with silk ribbon handles? He laughed again, but the sound cracked at the edges. I leaned closer to one of the bags, pretending to admire the paper. A price tag dangled from the tissue paper inside. Numbers bold and unapologetic, $389. For a single blouse, that was nearly my monthly grocery budget. My heart pounded, but I forced a smile. Marvelous bargain, I said dryly. I must be shopping at the wrong stores. Richard cleared his throat, guiding me back toward the living room as if distraction could erase what I'd seen. But my mind was already snapping photos, cataloging evidence, building a case airtight enough to put their fairy tales out of business. And then, just as I was about to sit down again, my phone buzzed, a message from Eli. The cashier. What he sent nearly knocked the breath out of me. And it was the missing puzzle piece I'd been praying for. I slipped my phone from my purse under the pretense of checking the time. A new message glowed on the screen, from Eli Whitaker. The cashier with the sharp eyes and sharper conscience. Attached was a photo. My breath caught. It was a grocery receipt dated 2 days ago. The ink still crisp. The total, $412.76. Line after line listed indulgence, imported wine, French cheese, fresh seafood, premium cuts of meat. At the bottom, customer, Richard Hayes. Beneath the photo, Eli had typed, Mrs. Cole. I thought you should see this. Same man, same story, different wallet. Please protect your son. The room tilted. My vision tunneled until all I could see was that glaring number, $412. A figure that represented more than my monthly food budget. Spent on luxuries while my son worked double shifts to cover their supposed emergencies. I shoved the phone back into my bag before anyone noticed. But my face must have betrayed something. Vanessa leaned in, her smile tight. Everything okay, Margaret? I forced a laugh. Just a spam text about car warranties. Apparently, my old Buick is still desirable. Richard chuckled politely, but his eyes narrowed, watching me too closely. He sensed something. Predators always do. Daniel, sweet Daniel, kept chatting, blissfully unaware. Every word from his mouth, how grateful he was for Vanessa's kindness. How hard Richard worked despite health issues, stabbed deeper. He had no idea he was rehearsing lines written for him by con artists. I pressed my palms together under the table. Proof was no longer a whisper behind a dumpster. It was here, black and white, stamped by a cash register. And still, I knew showing it to Daniel now would backfire. His loyalty was armor, and he'd defend Vanessa until his last dime was drained. I needed more, ironclad evidence, enough to shatter illusions and pierce through love's blindfold. And as fate would have it, the neighbors were about to hand me the next piece of the puzzle. Voices drifted in through the open window, 2 women walking their carts toward the curb. Their conversation carrying the way gossip always does when the universe decides you need to hear it. Did you see Vanessa's dress at the mall yesterday? One asked. Her tone half awe, half judgment. At least $200. I nearly fainted at the price tag. The other gave a snort. 200? Try more. I saw that same one at the boutique upstairs. It was closer to 3. And didn't she just tell everyone they were behind on rent again? My fork froze midway to my mouth. I leaned back ever so slightly, angling my ear toward the window while pretending to sip water. And that perfume she's wearing? The second woman went on. My granddaughter works at the French shop. Says Vanessa buys there all the time. Always cash. Always smiling. The first chuckled. Funny how they cry poor in one breath and drop bills like confetti in the next. Their voices faded as they moved down the street. But the damage was done. My heart hammered, not from surprise but from grim confirmation. It wasn't just me. It wasn't just Eli. The neighborhood had noticed too. Across the table, Vanessa kept chattering about bargain finds and special discounts, oblivious to the fact that her mask had slipped for everyone but Daniel. My son smiled, nodding along, swallowing each word as if it were gospel. I wanted to reach across the table, shake him, tell him look, open your eyes, but a mother knows, truth delivered too soon can harden into rebellion. If I accused her now, Daniel would leap to her defense. I needed the perfect moment. The kind of evidence no bargain tale could explain away. I cut another piece of steak, chewing slowly, forcing myself to act normal. But inside, my mind was racing, tallying, connecting, plotting. Every whisper, every bag, every glass of overpriced wine was building into a mountain too large to ignore. And then, as if the universe had finally decided I deserved front-row tickets to the truth, Richard made a slip. One careless move that cracked their entire story wide open. Richard returned from the kitchen carrying a smaller bag, one of those sleek paper ones with rope handles that never once touched a clearance rack. He set it on a side table, casual as a cat stretching in the sun. Then, as he leaned down to pour more wine, a receipt slipped out of his pocket. It fluttered to the floor like a feather. But to me it looked like a confession in plain sight. I bent quickly, pretending to adjust my shoe, and scooped it up before anyone noticed. One glance was enough. Another high-end store. Another triple-digit total. Date: yesterday. Item: designer shoes. Cost: $289.95. Paid in cash. Customer: Richard Hayes. My throat tightened. Just last week, Vanessa had called Daniel sobbing, saying her father's medicine was too expensive, that they were choosing between pills and food. Daniel had wired money that same night. And here was the proof. Pills apparently came in leather soles now. Everything all right down there, Margaret? Richard asked lightly, but I caught the flicker in his eyes. He'd realized his slip. I smiled sweetly, sliding the paper into my lap napkin. Just checking if my shoes still remember how to behave. They're older than some marriages. You know. Everyone laughed politely. But my pulse drummed. The cracks were widening. Their careful stories were unraveling thread by thread. Vanessa's phone buzzed again. This time, she glanced at it, smirked, and excused herself to the hallway. Daniel barely noticed, still deep in conversation with Richard about work. But I noticed. Every movement, every whisper, every lie hiding in plain sight. And just when I thought I'd gathered enough rope to hang their charade, my phone buzzed again, another message from Eli. This time, it wasn't just a receipt. It was a photograph that would make denial impossible. I slid my phone beneath the tablecloth. The screen's glow hidden by the heavy fabric. Another message from Eli Whitaker. My thumb trembled as I opened it. Not a receipt this time. A photograph. Richard Hayes, standing at the very same checkout counter I'd used that morning. His arms loaded with luxury, bottles of French champagne, boxes of imported truffles, and a cut of seafood that could feed an army. The timestamp in the corner was merciless. 2 days ago. The total scrawled across the top of the register screen read $612.40. My breath caught. $612. On the same day Vanessa had called Daniel in tears, saying the electric bill was overdue and their fridge was empty. My son had worked a double shift, wired them $300 that night, and apologized for not being able to give more. I stared at the photo until my eyes burned. Proof. Not gossip. Not whispers. Photographic proof. I shoved the phone back into my purse just as Vanessa reappeared. Face flushed. Perfume trailing behind her like a storm cloud. She slipped her phone into her handbag, plastered on a smile, and slid back into her seat. Everything okay, dear? I asked, my voice sweeter than honey and twice as sticky. Oh yes, she said quickly, just a little planning with friends. I nodded, sipping my wine to hide the bitter taste in my mouth. Planning, indeed. Probably the next fabricated emergency to wring more money from my son. I glanced at Daniel. He laughed at something Richard had said. His face lit with trust and affection. My chest ached. He had no idea he was dining with actors in a play designed to strip him bare. That night, I made myself a promise. I would not confront them here. In their house where every lie had a script. No, when the curtain finally fell. It would be on my stage. With evidence so damning even Daniel's love couldn't shield them. When we finally said our goodbyes, Vanessa pressed my hands with exaggerated warmth. "You're always welcome here, Margaret," she said, her smile stretched tight, like taffy about to snap. Richard hovered in the background, his eyes calculating, his handshake just a fraction too firm, as if he knew I had seen more than I should. Daniel, blissfully unaware, carried the cake box back to the car. "Wasn't that nice, Mom?" he said once we were on the road. "They really go out of their way to make us feel comfortable." I murmured, staring out the window at the passing street lamps. Comfortable wasn't the word I'd use. They certainly make an effort. Daniel grinned, misinterpreting my tone. "See? I told you Vanessa's family isn't so bad." I swallowed the retort clawing its way up my throat. How could I tell him that the stakes? The crystal glasses, the designer perfume, it was all bought with his sweat. His late nights, his tired hands on overtime keyboards? He'd defend her, defend them. Love had turned his heart into a shield against truth. By the time we pulled up to my apartment, I'd decided, no half-accusations, no motherly suspicions, only cold, hard evidence, evidence strong enough to bulldoze the lies they'd built. "Thank you for dinner, son," I said as he walked me up the steps. "Drive safe." He kissed my cheek, concern flickering in his eyes. "You're sure you're okay, Mom? You look tired." "Just the wine," I lied with a smile. "Too fancy for my blood." Inside, I collapsed into my favorite armchair. The one that groaned under me like an old friend. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Eli, another photo. This one, a receipt for 2 bottles of champagne at $119 each. Dated the exact same night Vanessa had called Daniel begging for help with rent. The proof was piling higher than their excuses. I knew then that I wasn't just a mother anymore, I was an investigator. And soon, my son would see the case file I was building. One lie at a time. The following week, I became a woman with a mission. My life narrowed to 3 things: watching, waiting, and collecting. Every phone buzz from Eli. Every whisper from a neighbor. Every stray receipt became a piece of the puzzle. I clipped them into a cheap binder from the dollar store, my case file. As I half-joked to myself. Except it wasn't a joke. Each page was a dagger aimed at the lies that had wrapped around my son like ivy. On Tuesday, Eli sent me another photo. A bill from the gourmet butcher. $187.50 for filet mignon and imported lamb chops. The same day Vanessa had called Daniel crying. "We don't have enough for groceries this week." On Thursday, Hermione, the sharp-tongued neighbor I'd overheard in the parking lot, rang me up. "Margaret, I thought you ought to know," she said in a voice both nosy and kind. "They had a party last Saturday. Caterers, a string quartet, champagne fountains. My daughter said the whole block smelled like lobster bisque." Lobster bisque. While I was stretching lentils into soup and Daniel was picking up extra shifts to pay someone else's bills. Each new piece of evidence was salt in the wound, but also fuel for my resolve. By Friday night, the binder was half full. I flipped through the pages, my hands trembling. Photos, receipts, notes, a timeline so damning it read like a crime report. Still, I kept silent with Daniel. I wanted my son to see everything in one blow. Undeniable and final. Love might excuse one lie. Maybe 2, but an entire binder? Even love would buckle under that weight. I sat back in my chair. Binder on my lap. Tea cooling beside me. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sliver of calm. The truth was on my side. And soon, it would speak louder than any excuse. That calm didn't last long. Because when Daniel showed up at my apartment the next evening, exhausted and worried, he carried news that made my blood run cold. Vanessa needed another, urgent $200 for Richard's surgery. And this time, I couldn't stay silent. Daniel sat down heavily on my couch. running both hands through his hair. He looked worn, shoulders sagging as though the world had pressed a weight onto his back. "Mom," he said, voice hoarse. "Vanessa just called. Her dad needs a minor surgery. Insurance won't cover it all. They need $200 by Friday." His words struck me like a slap. $200 for surgery. Just days after I'd held in my hand a receipt showing $119 bottles of champagne. Just days after hearing about a party with lobster bisque and a string quartet. I forced my face to stay calm. "That sounds serious," I said, folding my hands together to keep them from shaking. "Have you been able to help them yet?" "I've been working double shifts all week," Daniel admitted, rubbing at the dark circles under his eyes. "I'm exhausted, Mom, but what else can I do? They need me." "Oh, my sweet boy, if love could kill, his would have made him the first martyr of manipulation." My chest ached. Enough was enough. "Daniel," I said softly, taking his hands in mine. "I need to show you something. But before I do, promise me you'll remember why I'm showing it. I love you. I want to protect you. That's all." His brow furrowed, but he nodded. I reached for the binder. My binder. The one with every clipped receipt. Every photo. Every scrap of proof. I laid it on the coffee table like a holy book. Daniel blinked at it, confused. "What's this?" "Evidence," I whispered. "Evidence of the truth you need to see." I flipped it open to the first page, the $400 grocery receipt Eli had sent me. Daniel's eyes widened. "What is this?" "Look at the date," I urged. "The same week Vanessa called you saying they couldn't buy groceries. And here, imported wine, seafood, luxury cheeses, paid by Richard Hayes." I turned to the next page. Another receipt, another date, another luxury spree timed perfectly with their emergencies. "Mom, where did you get these?" he asked. Voice tight. I explained everything, my encounter with Eli, the overheard gossip, the binder full of contradictions. I spoke slowly, carefully, layering proof upon proof like bricks in a wall too solid to knock down. Daniel shook his head, clinging to denial like driftwood in a storm. "There has to be an explanation," he whispered, but when I turned the page to the photograph of Richard himself, champagne in hand, the storm inside him finally began to break. Daniel stared at the photo like it might change if he blinked hard enough. Richard Hayes, clear as day, standing at the checkout with 2 champagne bottles tucked under his arm. A grin on his face like a man who'd never heard of financial hardship. The timestamp glared at the bottom, the exact evening Vanessa had sobbed about unpaid rent. Daniel's lips parted. He looked from the photo to me, back to the binder, then back again, his mouth working but no words coming out. Finally, his voice cracked. There has to be some mistake. Maybe he was buying it for someone else. Maybe." I touched his hand gently. "Son, every single page says the same thing. Look here, groceries over $600 the same day Vanessa begged for help with utilities. And here, Hermione's testimony about the catered birthday party. And here, shopping bags worth more than your monthly rent." I flipped through page after page, forcing myself to keep my voice calm though my chest burned. Daniel pressed both hands to his face, muffling a groan. "Mom, no, Vanessa wouldn't, she couldn't." I leaned forward, voice low and steady. "Daniel, listen to me. I wish more than anything I was wrong. But I've seen it with my own eyes. Heard it with my own ears. They've been lying, not once, not twice, for years." He dropped his hands, eyes wet, jaw trembling. "But why? Why would she? Why would they?" "Because it worked," I whispered. "Because you're kind. Because you trust. Because they saw your generosity not as love, but as opportunity." Daniel stood suddenly, pacing the small living room. His hands raked through his hair. "Oh God, Mom, I've given them thousands I didn't have. I've been killing myself with overtime while they," his voice cracked again, "while they drank champagne." I rose slowly, steadying my own legs. "You are not to blame for their greed. Do you hear me? Your heart is good. It's not your fault they used it against you." He stopped pacing, turned to me, and his face was no longer just pained, it was hard. Determined. "I need to hear it from her. I need to confront Vanessa with this. Tonight." My stomach clenched, but I nodded. "If you're ready, then you must. But know this, once you put the truth on the table. There's no going back. Daniel's jaw tightened. There's no back left to go to. He left my apartment with the binder tucked under his arm. A soldier armed with receipts instead of rifles. I sat alone, trembling, knowing the battle that awaited him at home would either save his future or shatter it beyond repair. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my armchair with the lamp burning low, watching the shadows crawl across the wall as the hours stretched. Every tick of the clock felt like a drumbeat before a verdict. At 2:07 a.m., my phone rang. Daniel. His voice was raw, stripped down to something I hadn't heard since he was a child caught lying about breaking a neighbor's window. But this wasn't a boy's guilt. This was a man's heartbreak. "Mom," he said, his words jagged, "you were right. About everything." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone until my knuckles ached. "Tell me." He exhaled a shaky breath. When I got home, I looked through her closet. I never snooped before, I trusted her, but tonight, I had to know. "Mom, it's worse than we thought. Shopping bags everywhere, clothes with tags still on them, jewelry I've never seen her wear, receipts hidden in shoeboxes, hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars." My stomach twisted. "Oh, Daniel?" And there was a notebook. He continued, voice hardening. "She wrote down every lie. Every time she asked me for money. Every fake emergency. Even notes on what story to tell next. What to say to make me feel guilty if I hesitated." I gasped. That kind of calculation wasn't desperation. It was a business plan. "She admitted it, Mom," he said bitterly. When I confronted her, she stopped pretending. She said her family never needed the money. That they saw me as an easy source. Someone they could take advantage of. Those were her exact words. Take advantage. The silence between us was heavy, broken only by the sound of Daniel's ragged breathing. "What did you say?" I asked softly. I told her it was over. That our marriage is finished. I can't stay with someone who's been lying to me for years. Who's turned me into her paycheck. His voice cracked again. "I'm filing for divorce tomorrow." Tears slid hot down my cheeks. But they weren't just sorrow, they were relief. Too. He'd seen the truth, painful as it was, and chosen freedom. But before we hung up, Daniel said something that froze my blood. "Mom," when I confronted her. "She blamed you. She said you were the reason I saw through her. And I think she's not done yet." The line went quiet for a heartbeat. Just the hiss of static between us. Then Daniel's voice dropped lower. Steadier now, but edged with something I hadn't heard before, resolve. "She said you've been meddling since day one. He told me that you poisoned me against her. That you wanted our marriage to fail." I let out a humorless laugh. Classic. When the house of cards falls. Blame the wind. She got vicious. "Mom," Daniel continued, "screaming that you were jealous. That you couldn't stand to share me. She even swore she'd make sure I chose between her and you." He paused, his breath shaky. "But you don't have to worry. That choice has already been made." I swallowed hard, my heart aching at his words. "Daniel, she'll try again. Maybe not tonight. But manipulators don't surrender easily. They twist. They guilt. They cry. You need to be ready for that." "I am," he said firmly. I saw her mask crack. "Mom." The way she looked at me when I found that notebook, it wasn't love. It was rage. Rage at losing her income stream. At losing control. His voice cracked again. "God, Mom, I can't believe I didn't see it sooner." I gripped the phone tighter. "Don't blame yourself, son. Love makes us blind, and kind hearts are easiest to exploit. But blindness isn't weakness. You've learned. You see clearly now." There was silence. And then Daniel whispered, "She's still in the bedroom. Packing bags. I think she's going to run to her parents' house. And if I know Richard, he'll try to smooth it over, spin some story. Make it sound like a misunderstanding. Then let him try," I said coldly. "Because you have the binder. You have her notebook. You have the truth." For the first time all night, Daniel laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Yeah, the truth. Funny thing, Mom, turns out it fits in a $3 binder." I managed a smile through my tears. Sometimes the cheapest things carry the greatest worth. But even as I hung up, a shiver ran down my spine. Because manipulators don't vanish quietly. And I knew the Hayes family's final act was yet to come. The morning after Daniel's midnight call, I brewed tea I couldn't taste. My apartment felt smaller, heavier, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the shouting from the night before. At 10 o'clock sharp, the phone rang again. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but instinct made me lift the receiver. Margaret, a voice said smoothly. Richard Hayes. His tone carried the same oily politeness I'd heard over countless dinners. But now it was frayed, sharp at the edges. I think we need to talk. I said nothing, letting the silence stretch. You've interfered, he continued, his words careful, as though measuring each one. Vanessa tells me you've filled Daniel's head with nonsense. He's emotional, confused, but families shouldn't be torn apart by misunderstandings. Misunderstandings? I snapped, my grip tightening on the receiver. $600 grocery bills. Champagne receipts. A notebook cataloging lies like they were monthly invoices. Which part would you like me to misunderstand? He chuckled nervously, but it didn't reach his words. Margaret, we can resolve this. We'll return some of the money. We'll make amends. Just don't push him further. Divorce is messy, painful. Surely you don't want that for your son. My voice turned to steel. Richard, you had 2 years to be honest. 2 years to treat Daniel like family instead of a walking wallet. You chose deceit, and now you live with the consequences. The line went dead. He hadn't hung up so much as dropped the mask. My heart pounded, but I stood straighter. They were cornered now, their tricks exposed, their empire of lies collapsing. But a voice deep inside warned me, cornered animals can still bite. I turned off the kettle, untouched tea cooling in the pot, and whispered to the empty room, come at me if you want. Richard, this time, I'm not afraid. That afternoon, Vanessa herself came knocking on my door, makeup smudged, clothes plain, tears painted on, but I had already seen her truest face. And no costume could fool me now. The knock rattled my door with a kind of urgency I'd only heard in soap operas and debt collectors. I opened it slowly, and there she was, Vanessa. Gone was the polished woman in designer dresses and salon hair. Today she wore a plain sweater. No jewelry, no makeup except the mascara streaking down her cheeks like rain. Margaret, she gasped, clutching her chest. Please, you have to listen to me. I leaned against the frame, crossing my arms. Funny, that's exactly what I've been doing for 3 years. Listening. She flinched, but pressed on. I made mistakes. I admit it, but you've ruined everything. Daniel won't even look at me. He's talking about divorce. Do you really want to destroy your son's marriage? I let out a sharp laugh. Sweetheart, I didn't destroy anything. You did, with your lies. Your games. And that little notebook where you kept score like manipulation was a hobby. Her eyes widened. He showed you the notebook? He didn't have to. The ink still reeks of greed. For a moment, the tears vanished, replaced by a flash of rage. Then just as quickly, she smoothed it over, her lips trembling in a new performance. I loved him, Margaret. I still do. We were under pressure. My father, he pushed me. We needed help. Help? My voice sharpened. You weren't asking for help. You were running a business. Champagne, luxury clothes, catered parties. Don't insult me by calling that survival. She dropped her gaze, then looked back with a hint of desperation. Maybe we can fix this. If you convince Daniel to give me another chance. I cut her off with a raised hand. Stop. I won't convince my son to keep bleeding for your benefit. Not another dime, not another tear. Your show is over. The mask cracked again. Her mouth curled. Her eyes hardened. You always hated me, she spat. You never wanted me in this family. You poisoned Daniel against me. No, I said calmly, almost gently. I showed him the truth. You poisoned yourself. For a moment, she stood frozen, chest heaving, eyes wild. Then she turned sharply and stormed down the hall, slamming the stairwell door behind her. I closed my own door with a quiet click, my hands trembling only slightly. The battle was over, but the war scars would last. I thought that was the last I'd hear from her. But the Hayes family wasn't done, not yet. Because 2 days later, Daniel's lawyer uncovered a secret that made every champagne receipt look like pocket change. 2 mornings later, I was buttering toast I couldn't bring myself to eat when Daniel called. His voice carried that same raw edge I'd heard the night he found the notebook. Mom, he said, the lawyer found something. My heart sank. What is it, son? A bank account. Hidden. Under her maiden name. She's been funneling money into it for over a year. Not just the cash I gave her, loans she took out in my name. Credit cards I never even knew existed. Tens of thousands. Mom. His voice cracked. She buried me in debt while I was working overtime to keep her family afloat. I gripped the counter. Knuckles white. How much? Close to 40,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. 40? I whispered. Daniel. I know, he said, cutting me off. Enough for a house. Enough for a future. Instead, it's sitting in an account she thought I'd never find. The lawyer says we can fight it in court. Prove fraud. But, his breath caught. Mom, I married a thief. I closed my eyes, anger simmering like a storm behind my ribs. No, Daniel, you married a liar who wore love like a mask. But thieves can only steal what you let them keep. And now she keeps nothing. For the first time in days, I heard a spark of strength in his voice. You're right. The lawyer says I have a solid case. She won't get another cent. Not from me. Not from you. I smiled through my fury. That's my boy. But deep inside, a chill remained. Because people like Vanessa and Richard didn't fold quietly when money was on the line. And I knew their fight was only just beginning. That night, as I locked my door, a shadow moved across my hallway window, too deliberate to be chance. Someone was watching, and I had a sinking feeling I knew exactly who. That evening I double-checked every lock and peered through the peephole until my eyes watered. The shadow I'd seen earlier moved again, slow, deliberate, across the hallway light. I poured myself tea that went cold fast and listened for cars. For footsteps. For anything that might mean I was no longer merely observing a story but living inside it. The next morning the phone rang. It was Daniel's lawyer with a voice like good news wrapped in bruises. We've put a freeze on the account, she said. There's a temporary injunction. We've also begun the paperwork to reverse unauthorized charges. We need your testimony, Margaret, your phone records, the receipts, everything. Relief washed over me in a dizzy rush. After months of clutching a cheap binder like a talisman, the justice system finally had a file with my name on it. I gathered every scrap, every photograph Eli had sent, every note Hermione had whispered into my ear. Together, we drove to the lawyer's office, and I signed an affidavit that made my chest tremble with the gravity of it. Outside, a photographer, one of those official types who look like they were trained to make people feel bigger on paper, took a picture of me by the courthouse steps. You don't look like a public interest crusader, he joked, trying to ease the stiff line of my shoulders. I don't feel like one, I admitted. I feel like a mother who finally learned how to be loud enough for the truth to hear her. The legal fight began, petty and cruel in turns, subpoenas and hearings, and an emotional testimony that would test every bond in our family. But the most dangerous part wasn't in the courtroom, it was the quiet after. When people reveal who they truly are. Court days smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee. I sat in the gallery with Daniel, each of us a witness to how lies look under oath. Vanessa tried to compose herself, pale makeup, practiced sorrow, but the notebook came out like an ugly prop. And her voice, once silvered with seduction, cracked under scrutiny. Richard's explanations splintered apart under cross-examination. Questions about bank deposits forced candor he clearly wasn't prepared for. He shifted blame with a politician's skill until the evidence, page after page, left him nothing to negotiate with. The judge's face was an island of judgment. The law, slow as it often is, began to move. Neighbors were called. Eli gave his testimony, steady and kind. Hermione's gossip turned into hard statements. The receipts we'd collected, $412 here, $612 there. The $119 bottles and the hidden account, stacked like the chapters of a book whose ending was finally being written. When the judge ordered restitution and an account inventory, I felt a weight lift. It wasn't vindication exactly, it was recognition that manipulation had consequences. Daniel looked at me across the courtroom at a moment when everything was quiet and mouthed. Thank you, I nodded, tears and relief knotting together. The courts could fix balances and order repayments. But healing the deeper wounds, trust, faith, self-worth, would take a different kind of work. That would be our real, slow labor. After the hearings, the spectacle faded and the small, quieter work of repairing life began. Daniel moved into a modest apartment with a second-hand rug and a plant he somehow kept alive. He cut his hair shorter. He smiled less at first, then more, like a man relearning how to wear his face. He used the restitution not to live lavishly but to invest, a savings account, a small emergency fund, a class he'd always wanted in web design. We shifted to routines, Sunday dinners that were honest and plain. Movie nights with popcorn spilled on the couch. Walks in the park where he relearned how to laugh without checking his phone for requests. Regina came into his life months later, at first a friend from the office. Then something clearer, gentler. She was the kind of woman who stayed and communicated without theatrics. When she and Daniel married 2 years on, it felt like a new page closing with steady hands. She respected my place in his life and knit us together in a way Vanessa had never tried to. I kept the binder for a while. Not as a weapon but as a map of the past, a way to remember the moments I almost missed and the courage it took to stand up. Eventually I took it down, page by page, and tucked the receipts into a folder labeled Lessons, which I kept in the top drawer of my desk where my mother used to keep sewing needles and instructions for mending a life. Life, it turns out, doesn't snap back. It reknits, awkwardly at first, then more artfully, so that scars become part of the pattern rather than the whole garment. People asked me if I regretted the cost of truth, the divorce, the rifts, the nights I went to bed thinking I'd broken a family. Sometimes guilt pricked me like a thorn, but more often, pride warmed me like a heater on a cold morning. I'd saved my son from years more of being drained, and I'd taught him to pair generosity with caution. Eli and Hermione remained close. They would drop by sometimes with a pie or a ridiculous holiday sweater. We swapped stories about small-town life and the absurdity of seeing the world's worst in splendid armor. Daniel called more often, not out of obligation but because we wanted to. We'd chosen honesty over pretense. The Hayes family moved away that summer, taking with them the echo of clinking glasses and hushed explanations. There were no public feuds, just quiet departures and the removal of a number from our lives that had once felt like gravity. On a crisp morning, as Americana leaves skittered across the sidewalk, Daniel called to tell me he'd signed for a tiny house with a modest yard. "It has a space for you to come stay," he said, "just for weekends, your chair, my cooking, Regina's terrible attempts to knit." I laughed and promised I'd come. Some things, like trust, take time to regrow. But given soil and light, even the most trampled garden can surprise you with stubborn green. Years smoothed the raw edges into manageable memories. Daniel and Regina's child was born on a cool spring morning, his first grandchild's fingers curled around mine like a promise. I taught him how to make simple tea and how to fold a fitted sheet terribly. Because the important things are often not performed perfectly. Sometimes, when the house was quiet and the kettle hissed, I'd pull out the folder labeled Lessons and look at the receipts, not to berate the past but to remind myself that I had acted. I had chosen truth over silence, even when silence seemed easier. People told me I was brave. I laughed. Bravery is often just ordinary people refusing to look away. I had worried I'd be judged for meddling. In time I learned the difference between meddling and protecting. One erodes, the other repairs. The last thing I wrote in my journal that year was simple. Generosity is luminous when paired with wisdom. Protect what you love by seeing it clearly. Sitting in my armchair with a cup of tea that I can finally enjoy, I watch Daniel teaching his child to ride a bike in the cul-de-sac. Regina laughs, the child wobbles and keeps going. The world still holds crooked people and shiny liars, but it also holds people who mend, who learn, who choose better. I never expected to be a detective. I never wanted the drama. But the truth is, sometimes life asks you to show up as the person you didn't know you could be. I'm older, yes, and my knees complain louder in winter. But my heart is quieter and steadier. I'd rather be the woman who fought for one son's future than the woman who kept quiet for the sake of superficial peace. Love without wisdom can be a vulnerability. Protecting those you love sometimes requires hard choices and louder truths. In the end, honesty heals better than silence ever could.